Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I wanted to go over 3 steps to catch your first fish on the Brule River in the fall. Now, this is not a fly fishing video, although a lot of these kind of principles can be applied to fly fishing. This is just for you guys who haven't maybe fished the Brule a lot. Maybe you have, but you haven't caught that first lake run fish yet. It's a minimal amount of gear to get into these 3 techniques I'm going to show you. We're going to go over the 3 types of fish to target. We're going to go over the 3 locations to look for, and we're going to go over the 3 best methods to actually catch the fish in this video. So stay tuned to the end, because I am going to show you what I caught today and tell you exactly how I caught it. Let's get into it. Let's start with the fish. So there are 3 types of fish that most people target here on the Brule in the fall. Number 1 being lake run rainbow trout, or as most people call them here, steelhead. So we're just going to call them steelhead for the purposes of this video. You can get technical if you want, but we're not gonna. We're going to call them steelhead. So these steelhead typically run in the fall. They're not here to spawn. They're a spring spawning fish, and they're here to eat. So they're fairly easy to catch, especially as they first come off of the lake and start running up the river. They're hungry, and they're looking for brown trout eggs, salmon eggs, aquatic insects, that kind of thing. That's species number 1 that people target. Number 2 are going to be brown trout. So brown trout come from the lake in the summertime. They run up the river as well, but they're here for a different reason. They're here to spawn. So browns that come up and spawn in the fall, they start in late August and they'll run all the way into November, depending on a lot of factors. But they also are here to eat. They'll do both when they're up in the Brule, and they'll stay oftentimes through the winter into the spring before they head back into Lake Superior as well. The 3rd species is coho salmon. Now, coho salmon are here to spawn as well, but they're not here to feed as much as the browns, because they're going to die once they spawn. They're typically 3 years old when they run up the river, and they're going to die after the spawn. So they're easiest to catch right away as they run up the river. The longer they're in the river and the longer they progress towards the spawn, the harder they are to catch. But they are very catchable much of the season. So that's kind of the 3 species. There are some kings in the river, but they're very hard to target. Very few people successfully target them. So we're not going to really go over the kings much here. There's a lot better places to go catch kings than the Brule, but you may luck into one. You never know. So with that said, let's get into location. So I'm actually going to show you the 3 primary locations that I look for fish for here, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Alright guys, this is what I would consider a riffle. So a riffle is basically just a place where there's some pocket water, like behind this rock here, and along the sides where it gets a little bit deeper, and kind of a flat stretch of river. So it gives the fish a place to kind of hang and hold up, especially if you look down here. You see there's quite a bit of rapids downriver. They get tired running up those rapids, and they want to stop at these riffles and rest and sit behind these rocks and in those little deeper channels. And what you're looking for in a riffle is to fish those deeper pockets. You're always looking for pocket water, whether it's on the edges or kind of in the middle behind boulders or whatever. It's a little bit slower water, usually has a good current seam that you can drift through. And that's a great place to tight line drift, because it keeps your bait moving. So those spawn bags, those flies, that kind of thing. And then also it's a great place to throw hardware and kind of run it around those boulders and stuff. So that's your riffles. All right guys, now this is what I would consider a run. So a run is more of a spot where the river narrows up a little bit and kind of squeezes the water down and creates a channel in the middle of the river. Typically has current throughout the whole channel, and it's quite a bit deeper than the rest of the riffles and the rapids. And this is one of my favorite places to fish in the Brule. Almost always hold fish, and they're easy to fish with any method. You can float fish them, you can tight line drift them, and you can cast lures in them, because the current's fast enough to keep your tight line moving typically. It's great for float fishing. You can drift right through the center of that hole and hit those seams. Runs typically have really defined seams, current seams on the edges, and oftentimes there's a riffle coming in to the run right here, and that tends to hold fish as well, because they can retreat into the deeper water of the run. They can run up into the riffle and spawn or feed or whatever. So runs are my number 1 place to look for on the Brule, and they can be on one side or the other. They can be in the center of the river. There can be 2 runs next to each other sometimes, but basically it's just where the current narrows up, it gets deeper, and there's current throughout. All right guys, so this is what I would call a pool or a hole. Typically this is a wider spot in the river that's dished out, the current slows way down, and there's usually some sort of slack water on the edges and an eddy where the water's swirling. That's really the biggest difference between a hole or a pool and a run, is there's deep pools and slack water, and that's where the fish are going to go when the water gets cold. When they really want to rest or have security, they're going to go to the bottom of those deeper pools where there's less current and more water over the top of them. So these are prime places to drift afloat. They're tough to fish with a tight line drifting method because your bait isn't drifting along fast enough. So they'll kind of stick to the bottom and you'll end up getting snagged a bunch, and it's just not going to have a natural drift. Great place to throw hardware also, especially at the head and the tail of the pool. And any of these three structures can be tied together. So you can have a riffle, a run, and a pool all connected. That's like best case scenario. When you can find three of the, or at least two of the different types of fish holding cover right next to each other, especially with a pool nearby, those fish will move back and forth between the run, the riffle, and the pool and kind of use that area. So it's a really attractive area to fish typically. So that's kind of your basic stuff you're looking for as far as where fish are going to be. And then holes and runs, the tail and the head of the run and pool are both good, as well as the center. So fish the whole thing through and you should have some luck. All right, so there you go. There's three spots to look for in the Brule to catch fish. Now, as far as location goes per species, steelhead are fast water fish typically. They're going to be at the heads and tails of these pools and runs and in the riffles. They like that faster water. Brown trout can be anywhere, but they like cover. So they're going to be like near rocks, near trees a lot of times. So you want to be fishing near that stuff if you can. And then the coho salmon are going to be in your slower water. They're typically going to be in the pools, the deeper runs. They don't like the current as much as the trout do. And you'll often find them in those deepest, biggest pools in the river. But you can catch them when they're running and moving around, but most of the time they're going to be near that deep water. Now, as far as techniques to catch fish in the Brule in the fall time, there's three different primary ways that I use to catch fish. Number one being tight line drifting. And to do that, I'm just going to be casting my bait upstream and feeling the bottom, just ticking the bottom once in a while as I drift with a split shot. And you want a nice long rod for that. This one right here is what I've been using this year. It's a 9-foot medium St. Croix Encore. It's designed for fishing rivers like this. You want that long limber rod for moving your bait up and down and keeping it above those rocks and feeling the bite. And then once you hook a fish, you want that long slow action rod to hold the fish so it can't shake the bait free, especially with those small hooks we're using. Now for bait for drifting, you can use spawn bags, yarn flies, stonefly nymphs, any kind of insect or egg imitation, or of course live bait like night crawlers work as well. Basically any water except really slow deep pools. It's hard to keep that bait moving at a decent rate and you're going to get snagged up. And so you want to fish more of the runs, the riffles, and the heads and tails of the holes with this technique. Number two is going to be using the same baits, but we're going to use a float. So we can use the same rod. It's nice to have a nice long rod to manage the float system. Now some guys get very technical about float fishing. They're fishing center pin reels and rods that run $1,000 plus, and you don't have to. You can run a float on a long spinning rod like this Encore and it'll work just fine, and I've caught plenty of fish doing that. The nice thing about a float is it keeps your bait above the snaggy bottom and it keeps it floating. Even in slow current, it'll keep it drifting just above the bottom where those fish are and it won't hang up on you. It's also the only way to fish downstream cover sometimes to get that bait where you need it to be. So it's useful to have some floats with you, and you don't need anything fancy, just a clip-on float, a few split shot kind of spaced apart to kind of sink that line down, and then your bait at the bottom. And you want it set just so it's not snagging the bottom when you drift through that main part of the hole. And that's a great way to catch fish as well in the fall. And you can catch any species of fish float fishing with spawn bags, beads, yarn, any of the above. So even night crawlers work really well sometimes under a float. Now the third method that we use up here on the Brule in the fall is casting hardware. So that would primarily be spinners. Spinners are going to be your best bet up here for most of the time. It's the easiest bait to learn to fish, and trout absolutely love them. And it's really simple to use them. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go start at the base of the area I want to fish and fish my way upriver, casting across and retrieving across the river, or slightly casting upriver and retrieving down and letting the bait swing down below. Sometimes they'll hit on the swing, sometimes they'll hit as soon as the blade starts turning, so you have to be ready all the time. But that's how I fish most of the time, is casting basically across current and retrieving and letting it swing below me. And that's a great way to catch any species of trout or salmon in the Brule. And you can switch up your colors, you know, use some darker colors, some silver metallics, use some pinks, some oranges. Eventually you'll find what the fish want. Now, spinner fishing is typically better in warmer water. The fish are a little bit more aggressive. As the water cools, it gets harder and harder to catch fish on hardware. So then I would transition into some more of the slower techniques that we were talking about. So, well, there you go, guys. Hopefully that gives you a good place to start. Now, like I promised, I'm going to show you how I caught my fish today. So let's go watch that footage right now. All right, fish on, guys. I saw some cohos rolling right up here, and I figured they were spawning. They're probably dropping eggs. So when they're dropping eggs like that, it's a perfect time to drift spawn right through that area. And I had a yarn fly on, but I just hooked a little spawn bag on the back of that yarn fly, drifted it behind where I saw that splashing, and bam, steelhead on. Those steelhead sit there and eat the eggs when the salmon are dropping eggs, and they'll sit right behind them when they're spawning. So we got a pretty decent one hooked up here. Now, this is why it's important to have a long, limber rod when you hook a fish on these little number 6 hooks. That fish can head shake, it can run, but that rod is always loaded and it's taking up the slack, because the second this fish gets slack, he's gone. So that's why this St. Croix Encore is such a good rod for this. Whoa, now there's a run. That's one angry fish. When he takes a big scream and run like that, I got to play with my drag, because he could really easily break the line. I only have 6-pound test leader on here because the water's so clear today. So another thing I do to kind of add some shock absorption is, like this rod, I've got braid on it for better feel, but I've got about a 12-foot top shot of mono. So it adds a little bit of shock absorption on there, like a rubber band. There we go. Oh, beautiful fish. Oh man, what a gorgeous fish. There you can see that spawn bag and the yarn right there. That's exactly what did the trick for that fish. Man, what an awesome fish, and what an awesome day up here on the Brule. It's always beautiful and it's always awesome to come up here. Even if you can't catch a fish, it's well worth the effort. So I'm going to leave links below for everything I talked about in this video, and I'll also leave links for a couple other videos on how to tie spawn bags and how to tie up yarn flies, etc., so you can kind of learn a few more things about what I've been talking about here. And make sure you subscribe, because I got more stuff like this out there and more coming. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll catch you later. Get hooked up.